Hello everyone, and welcome to Anomalous Archive, where we post scary stories to help you sleep. Please comment where you are listening to my videos from, since I believe it would be fun for all of us to know. Also, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's reach 50 subscribers until the end of this month. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. September weather was capricious. During the day, the sun warmed the street with its soft rays. A light breeze played with fallen leaves. But at night it turned cold, as if autumn had grown tired of its duties early and was rushing to yield to winter. Yet the puddles had not yet frozen. To express myself too artistically, this benefits me. While I am by no means a person of art, creativity calms me. I live in the oldest district of the city, where the houses are a century old. I don't drink or smoke, and in my free time, I sketch in my notebooks. A kind of therapy for a former investigator who retired from the field long ago. On clear days, I sometimes visit Black Lakes. I have a garage there with an old motorboat, and I enjoy fishing in silence. Hobbies help me maintain balance. That's the kind of person I am. Without constant equilibrium, I can fall apart and lose myself. My shoulders carry a heavy past. For many years, I witnessed the darker side of our world, knowing well that many terrible things happen here, making it difficult to ignore the hints of an uneasy heart. One such September morning, I woke up with a sense of foreboding. I simply opened my eyes and thought something strange was happening in our courtyard. This feeling was impossible to explain. My intuition, honed by years of work, rarely failed me. Many investigators feel the presence of death. Not that they are psychics, but perhaps that is why they are drawn to unravel mysteries. This time, the sensation was so vivid that I got out of bed, dressed, and stepped outside. It wasn't even 5 in the morning. It was dark outside, the house was silent, and there I was in sweatpants and slippers, stepping out of the building just to look around. Call me eccentric, but my suspicions proved correct. Leaving the apartment and descending the stairs, I found myself in the courtyard. Immediately, I realized my intuition had not deceived me. Slumped against the wall of the building, there was a corpse on the asphalt. It was a middle-aged man in tattered clothes, not necessarily homeless, but certainly disheveled. His eyes were open, his jaw slack, as if he had been about to scream but was silenced by death. The body was eerily pale, almost blue, a ghastly sight. Did this man know, when entering our courtyard, that he would die here? The investigator in me stirred, and I quickly ran through various scenarios in my mind. Violent death, heart attack, or something else. Without wasting time, I called the police and an ambulance. I sensed this was no simple matter and wanted to hear someone else's opinion. The ambulance arrived first, followed shortly by the police. The body was examined briefly. No obvious signs of violence, only severe hypothermia, as evidenced by the pallor, bluish lips, and vacant gaze. Then the morgue van arrived. The police, having documented the body's position, instructed the orderlies to take it. They tried to lift it, but the man seemed to be frozen to the asphalt and wall. They had to pry the body free. Watching this, I asked the investigator, "What do you think happened to him?" The seasoned officer, his face frozen in a mask of fatigue, replied, "Clearly, he froze to death. But it's not that cold yet. Sure, it's chilly enough to catch a cold, but to freeze to death?" I remarked, "What? Did you measure the temperature yourself?" The man died on the spot. From the external signs, it's hypothermia. The forensic experts will sort it out further if necessary, the investigator replied. He seemed uninterested in considering anything hidden. I bit my tongue, realizing I was meddling in something that wasn't my business. Let these guys do their work. No one's paying me for this. Everyone left. The old courtyard emptied, and I stared at the brightening sky, feeling an unsettling dread creeping under my skin. It couldn't be that simple. The courtyard was damp, You couldn't freeze to death here, even if you tried. I returned to my apartment and tried to put the mystery out of my mind. To distract myself, I grabbed a sketch pad and pencil and began drawing. But what appeared on the page reflected my recent impressions. The face of the frozen corpse with wide open eyes. I couldn't shake it. All I could do was accept it, endure it, and wait for life to return to normal. A life disrupted by a random dead man. A grim reminder of a long-abandoned profession. A day passed, then night fell. I lay in bed, listening to the sounds of the courtyard. The hum of a street lamp, the rustling wind, water dripping from a roof somewhere. Nothing suspicious. Then, amidst these sounds, a new one emerged. A quiet, intermittent breathing, as if someone was trying to warm their frozen hands. At first it seemed trivial, but I jumped out of bed and quickly approached the slightly open window. Such was the strength of my premonition. I always knew which details meant nothing and which couldn't be ignored. The courtyard looked empty, cracked asphalt, a manhole cover, an old domestic car covered in fallen leaves. But after a few seconds, the sound repeated. It was quiet but distinct. I stared through the glass, but saw no one. Who was breathing so strangely? My imagination couldn't conjure an image of a person with such unnatural breathing. The sound grew fainter, then stopped altogether. I returned to bed, but after half an hour, I realized I wouldn't fall asleep. So, I decided to go for a walk, hoping the fresh air would help me settle into a peaceful night. I stepped outside and began walking along familiar sidewalks, listening to the sounds. Humming streetlights, a faint wind. Then, at the end of the street, I noticed movement. There in the distance, someone stood, swaying slightly in place. This figure appeared white, like a statue, with eyes glowing in unnatural yellow, like two burning embers. You might think it was just the streetlight reflecting, but the figure stood in the shadows. I felt no fear, only curiosity. My heart, hardened by years in the police force, maintained its steady rhythm. I quickened my pace toward the pale figure and could make out that it was short, stocky, and likely hunchbacked. But as I got closer, the white silhouette darted into the darkness, as if unwilling to be properly seen. At the spot where it had stood, there were no notable traces, just slightly flattened grass. There were no footprints on the ground. Could this person have been barefoot? I looked around. The street was empty. A thought crossed my mind. This was a harbinger of trouble, of death. Something had taken an interest in our neighborhood. Something else would happen, and soon. I had felt such premonitions before when I worked in law enforcement. They were like whispers on the wind, always confirmed by bitter truths. And now, standing on the deserted street, I felt the same unpleasant weight in my soul, a whisper that said, "You're not a witness, you're a participant." I wanted so badly to distance myself from the brewing events that I spent the next day fishing. I went to Black Lake, pulled the boat out of the garage, and rowed to the middle of the calm body of water. I sat there with my fishing rod, forgetting about everything that had been troubling me. The sun gently caressed my face with its warm rays, and the fresh air, filled with the scents of water and reeds, soothed my soul. By the end of the day, I had caught several crucian carp. Not the largest ones, but the fishing truly distracted me from my dark thoughts. I returned home calm and refreshed. The sky had already turned dark purple, and the lamps and street lights were slowly flickering to life, not yet bathing the street in orange light. Walking through a familiar alley, I noticed an elderly neighbor ahead of me. I hadn't seen her face yet, but I recognized the plump figure and the mass of curly hair. "Good evening, Grandma Mary," I said, but she didn't respond. She stood motionless, holding onto the wall of a house as if glued to it. Feeling uneasy, I quickly walked closer. The old woman was frozen in place, her foot stuck to the wet asphalt, and her hand to the brick wall. A wave of horror washed over me. I'd seen a lot, but never a standing corpse. My neighbor, Grandma Mary, stood there completely blue, her mouth open, her cloudy eyes covered with a thin, icy film. Suddenly, her legs gave way. Slightly thawed, she collapsed onto the asphalt like a giant doll. I immediately pulled out my phone and called the police, unafraid of having to explain how I once again found myself near a frozen corpse. While waiting for them to arrive, I decided to examine the body. Everything looked very strange. According to my smartwatch, it was 9 degrees Celsius outside. Not even freezing, just a bit chilly. But the old woman's body seemed as if it had been in a freezer. Her skin was blue, her lips dark blue, almost black. She couldn't have frozen to death without some specific reason. This was a case that couldn't be logically explained. The police arrived quickly. They examined the body, asked me standard questions, and took my information. "This is the 4th case," said the same investigator who had been skeptical the last time. "Yesterday, we took a guy to the morgue who froze in the stairwell 2 blocks from here. And there was another woman found nearby. Went out to take out the trash and froze solid. And what is this? Some kind of climate anomaly? Sudden localized frosts?" He was probably asking because he knew I had previously worked in the police force and expected me to have more expertise in such matters. But I had never seen anything like this myself. So I shrugged and said, "It's a mystery." I felt sorry for Grandma Mary. She was a kind woman, and she didn't die from illness or because her time had come, but from something terrifying and unknown. After that, I could no longer just sit idle. I wanted to act, to get involved. I wasn't an outsider in the criminology circle. I still had some connections. I called a forensic acquaintance. He was a man of his craft, not one to share secrets, but this time he made an exception. "The case is truly anomalous," he said. "All 4 didn't just suffer from hypothermia. They had temperature damage concentrated around their hearts, as if they were struck by cold directly in the chest, causing their blood to instantly freeze. The reasons are unclear so far." His voice carried confusion, which only heightened my sense of unease. I realized I was peering into an abyss where there were no answers, only questions. But I couldn't back down. Now, every evening before bed, I roamed the nearby streets, scanning everything around me, looking for even the slightest hint of something that could explain the anomaly. One such evening, under a clear moonlit sky, I was walking past a neighboring house when I heard strange sounds. It was as if someone frozen was blowing on their cold hands to warm them up. The sounds came from ahead, where the sidewalk stretched into an alley. I headed in that direction, straining my eyes and ears. In the dim light, a short figure moved. Fear gripped me suddenly, but faded just as quickly. I was used to acting in dangerous situations. I had more than enough experience. "Stop!" I shouted and rushed after them. It was the same person I had encountered once before at night. My intuition told me they were somehow connected to the mysterious deaths. I ran closer and finally saw what they were. Broad, short, hunched, wrapped in thick white fabric resembling a funeral shroud. Beneath it, knobby vertebrae protruded like a ridge. Hearing my voice, they turned, and when the street light illuminated their face, I realized it wasn't a person. It was a demon, a creature from the deepest circle of hell, where eternal, relentless cold reigns. They had yellow, glowing eyes without pupils, like 2 embers, and an enormous mouth with sparse, sharp teeth resembling icy stalactites. Their gray, frostbitten hair stood on end. Their gaze paralyzed my will. I couldn't move or scream. I just stood there, exhaling mist. I felt colder than ever before, freezing in their presence, as if all the warmth was being drained from me. The hunched demon reached out a hand and stepped closer. They stared at my chest, as if seeing through my skin and ribs to my still warm heart. Long, sharp claws, resembling icy needles, extended toward me. Realizing that death itself was approaching, I forced myself to break free from the hypnotic state and jerk backward. I ran several meters on numb legs, grabbed an empty glass bottle from a nearby trash bin, and hurled it at the monster. The bottle shattered against their head, shards flying everywhere. The creature opened their mouth and howled like an icy wind before vanishing into the darkness, dissolving into the alley. I stood there, trembling from cold and fear. A moment longer, and that creature would have turned me into a block of ice. And how was I supposed to prove that a frost demon was lurking in the neighborhood? Who would believe me? No one, obviously. When I tried to tell the police what I had seen, they brought up my past. A detective picked up the phone at the station and said, "I did some checking. Turns out you were dismissed for alcohol problems. Is that right?" "I haven't drunk for 9 years," I replied. "Well, good for you," said the investigator. There was disbelief in his voice. "But think about it. How does all this sound? Yes, the cases are strange, but what are you suggesting? Believe in demons? Who even asked you to patrol the streets? Let us do our job. I don't know who you saw there, but we don't catch devils. We'll figure it out ourselves." The investigator hung up, and I felt humiliated. My alcoholic past had no statute of limitations. Yes, there was such an episode in my life, but since the moment I was kicked out of my job for it, I didn't drink even on holidays. Let them not believe me. I wouldn't stand aside. I had something prepared for an emergency. In my garage, where my motorboat stood, a pistol was buried. I kept it there because I didn't want to part with the weapon. Who knew it would come in handy one day? The very next day, I went to the Black Lake and retrieved it. Now the pistol was always hidden behind my belt. It was calmer to patrol the streets with it. I walked through my neighborhood, watching the people returning home late at night, eyeing every corner in search of that demon with a hypnotic gaze. My efforts were unsuccessful for a long time. The hunchback monster seemed to avoid me, operating in other places and at other times. A rumor reached me. Another victim, another frozen person. No witnesses, only the body. Nobody saw anyone. I didn't spare time or effort. I became truly obsessed, sacrificing sleep for my hunt. I wanted to encounter that demon again and put a bullet between its eyes. What's worse, lead or silver? Another evening was quiet, almost soundless. I walked down the familiar street, glancing around as usual. Suddenly, a woman's scream came from an alley. I saw a girl running from the shadows. She had no face. She was running, waving her arms, and looking through me. I had to catch her by the shoulders. She was a very young, fragile girl, about 20. "What happened?" I asked, looking into her eyes. With a trembling hand, she pointed at the alley and barely whispered, "My boyfriend. They did something to him." Without thinking, I rushed there and found myself between 2 brick walls. Our neighborhood is full of such narrow streets, but this one was the tightest of them all. In this stone crack, illuminated from behind by the streetlight, stood he, the hunchback with the hypnotic eyes, covered in a white shroud. At his bare feet lay a young guy, pale, frozen to death. The yellow-eyed demon opened his mouth, and with a puff of bluish steam, he looked satisfied. This hunchback fed on living warmth, sucking it out of the body with a single touch. He looked into my eyes, and I felt the cold penetrate my heart. On instinct, I drew the pistol and aimed at chest level. The whole world around me stopped. My fingers squeezed the trigger. The sound of gunshots exploded the silence, echoing like thunder through the street. 1 shot, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Each bullet hit the monster square in the chest. They shredded his white garment, leaving black round holes. From these wounds, dark streams crawled down. The hunchback staggered and fell onto his back. As I had assumed, The demon was vulnerable. If he's made of flesh, he can die. But it turned out I relaxed too soon. A second later, the hunchback monster sprang to all fours and ran out of the alley like an animal. "Call the police quickly," I shouted at the girl, who was still standing nearby. I couldn't let the monster slip away and took off after him. The hunchback raced down the street, his shadow darting across the walls. A trail of bloody droplets followed him. My fear, mixed with rage, returned my former strength. Although even in my youth I never ran this fast, gasping and wheezing. The hunchback leaped to an old house and dived into a broken basement window. Fast and unexpectedly, he disappeared into the black hole. I slowed my pace, assessing the situation. Inside, a wave of determination rose. It might cost me my life, but I couldn't let this creature escape. Gripping the pistol in my hand, I climbed through the basement window, dropped to the floor, and found myself in complete darkness. There was not a sound around. My heart beat in sync with the dull echo of my footsteps. Breathing in air filled with mildew and dampness, I began counting, trying to calm the trembling in my chest. How many bullets were left? There had been 8. I clearly remembered how they clicked in the chamber. 6 shots, so only 2 left. I couldn't waste them. I needed to finish off this monster. I walked past the cold walls, brushing my shoulders against old pipes. But where was he? Where? Suddenly, in the impenetrable darkness, yellow eyes flashed. 2 embers, not emitting a trace of heat, only cold. I repeated my old mistake. I didn't look away in time and became fixated on that ominous light. All my will vanished in an instant. The yellow eyes burned half a meter away from me, and an icy hand laid itself on my chest. That light touch felt like a heavy blow. Everything inside me froze with cold. My heart beat irregularly, and with each passing second, I felt warmth leaving my body. The hellish cold pierced me to the bone, freezing every muscle. But I still had the pistol in my hand. I couldn't drop it even if I wanted to. My palm was glued to the frozen grip, summoning all my remaining strength. I raised the muzzle to the demon's face and shot him right in the eye. The yellow spark popped, splattering me with sticky, foul blood. The hunchback roared and collapsed to the floor. He screamed loudly, clutching the wound. Along with the eye, a piece of his skull was blown off. But even after the close-range shot, the demon was still alive. The yellow spark of the remaining eye glowed in the darkness, but it could no longer paralyze my will. My heart began beating strongly again, spreading warmth throughout my weakened body. I took a sharp step forward, afraid that this disgusting creature would try to escape again. The last bullet, the final attempt, I bent down and almost poked the muzzle into the monster's eye. I pulled the trigger. A deafening bang exploded through the basement. My ears rang. Thick blood splattered on my face. The hunchback lost the top part of his head and now lay motionless on the floor. When the deafness from the gunshots passed, I heard the wail of police sirens. Maybe that girl called them, or maybe it was other people who heard the shots. I came out of the basement with my hands raised and threw the weapon on the ground, surrendering without resistance. Let them arrest me. Let them judge me. It doesn't matter. The main thing is that the monster is dead. Let them go down into the basement and make sure it's not a human. They handcuffed me. I remained silent, knowing I would still have time to tell everything during the interrogations. The guys didn't understand what was going on for a long time. Their faces were full of utter confusion. Even without half a head, this creature did not look human. There are no people with animal-like jaws. There are no people with thick black oil instead of blood. They packed the body in a bag and took it away. Then I was interrogated, and I told everything from the beginning, omitting only where I got the gun. Why testify against myself? I wasn't held in the detention center for long. The next morning, a new interrogation took place. and it was conducted by a serious, intellectual man who, most likely, didn't work in the local police department but had come urgently from the capital. When I recounted everything from the beginning once more, he nodded and said, "I have good news for you. Due to the circumstances, they decided to classify this case. The creature you killed really has nothing to do with a human. The corpse has already been sent to a special laboratory for study. And since, in fact, there is no case, we have no reason to keep you here. Just don't expect to get your weapon back." "Understood. Call me if anything," I replied. Perhaps this was the most significant and the scariest episode of my life. It's unlikely that I'll ever be let in on the secrets of this case. I don't know who that humpback was or where he came from, but I call him a demon who escaped from the depths of hell. If that's the case, then a bullet works against them as well as crosses and holy water. Do I feel like a hero? Hardly. I just did what I've been trained for many years to do. My skills once again serve the good of people. That makes me happy,